Recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses here today, answering the good questions and the silly questions. I was pleased to see the release of the department's commercial space integration strategy. The strategy mentions working to ensure a safe, secure, stable, and sustainable space domain. Secretary Austin and General Brown, what does a sustainable space domain look like to you, and why is this important to achieve? I know it's a bit general.
Well, first of all, it means that we have the right capabilities here to provide capabilities to the operators on the surface of the planet. It also means that we have a diverse capability and that we're resilient so that we can respond to challenges if we are challenged. And that's been our goal, to make sure that we continue to build agility and redundancy into our Space Force capability, so that we can meet challenges going forward.
Thank you, General Brown.
I would add to, not only for our military capabilities for us to be able to do military operations, but it's also how we protect our national interest in having that capability in space to deter activity, but also prevent and respond, because it impacts not just our military, but how we are able to communicate, how we do our economic transactions, and many other areas that are important to our security and the things that we do as a nation.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, within the commercial space integration strategy, 13 mission areas in national security space are identified. 6 are identified as primarily government, 6 is hybrid, and just 1 is primarily commercial, which is space access, mobility, and logistics. How do you see opportunities within the hybrid and primarily commercial mission areas growing for commercial space companies?
Well, in terms of opportunities in the commercial sector, for us to work together with the commercial sector, we account for that in our strategy, and we need to do more to leverage what's in the commercial sector and to work together with the commercial sector. I think they've demonstrated an ability to scale and speed some things that I think will continue to be useful to us, and so I think that relationship's really important.
Secretary Austin, I appreciate you acknowledging in your written testimony the department's failure to generate a clean audit opinion as an issue. You said you directed senior leaders to tie performance results to the organization's audit objectives. Can you elaborate on what that looks like in practice, and has the directive produced any results or improvements in the audit? And what other steps are you taking to provide oversight of taxpayer dollars?
Well, being good stewards of taxpayers' dollars is really important to us, and we do have the means, the mechanisms in place to make sure that we are spending in accordance with congressional intent, and we review our activities and actions routinely. In October, I published a memo to DOD and emphasized the importance of reaching our goal of having a clean audit in the future. And we recognize that there are a number of things that we need to do between now and then to achieve that objective. But leaders need to be focused on this and invested in this. And so for that reason, I think it's important that as leaders are rated going forward, they get feedback from their supervisors on whether or not they're being supportive of the overall objective. You either are or you're not. It's pretty clear. It's a fact. And if they're not, then we need to design those steps that we need to take to make sure that we're coming close to meeting our objectives. But this is really important to us. Undersecretary McCord and I have worked together hand in hand on this for some time, and we're both committed to making sure that we get a clean audit going forward. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, ma'am, if you could just step aside there. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, can you confidently say, I mean, with the American people watching, that the world is safer now 3 years under President Biden and your leadership?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Secretary, I have a list here. Where would you say that we're safer? Would you say we're safer in Afghanistan? Would you say we're safer in the Middle East? Would you say we're safer in Africa, the Red Sea, Israel, Europe, South China Sea, the homeland with FBI director talking about 300 people on the terrorist watch list that's come over our southern border? Where would you say we're safer?
Well, we certainly have worked hard to move things to
Mr. Secretary, I know we've worked hard to move things. Where, I mean, it should be a simple answer. You said, yes, you could confidently say we are safer after 3 years of your and the President's leadership.
Take a look.
Where are we safer?
Take a look at Europe, for example. What if we were not doing what we're doing in support of Ukraine? Where would Europe be right now?
Mr. Secretary, Europe has the largest land war on your watch, on the President's watch. Deterrence failed. Do you agree that do you think the deterrence worked in Europe?
Putin was not going to be, Putin was intent on
he could not be deterred?
Putin was intent on invading Ukraine. He's been so for a long time. He didn't recognize.
So would you
Ukraine
take
as a
that
country.
same moniker to the Pacific, that she, who's openly talking about preparing for war, he's going to invade no matter what, and therefore can't be deterred? I mean,
But he hasn't. He hasn't done that.
Look at ISIS,
and our goal is to make sure that he doesn't do it.
ISIS is back, but we failed to do that. You failed to do that in Europe. I mean, deterrence failed. Let's at least agree that we may take action since.
If we were not doing what we're doing,
Mr. Secretary, your answer is Europe is safer after 3 years. So I'm talking Red Sea. I'm talking our ally Israel. I'm talking about ISIS is back. Afghanistan, the next Saigon.
It is a complex environment, but without our work, without our intervention, in a number of cases, it would be far, far worse. You know, we have not only kept NATO together,
of low
NATO
expectations.
has expanded. You know, if you look at what's going on in the Indo-Pacific, you know, our relationships there are stronger than they've ever been. And again, with your help, we continue to invest in the capability, capacity to make sure we
Mr.
make.
Secretary, we're going to state this right here. The second Thomas Shoal off the coast of the Philippines could be the next flashpoint to launch World War III. Our enemies and our adversaries no longer respect and fear us. And that has happened and deteriorated precipitously in the last 3 years. And I find it astounding that your answer of what's safer is Europe with the death and destruction that's going on there. But let's switch to domestic.
There's no question that it's a challenging and complex environment. But again, without our work, without our
Mr.
intervention, without our support,
I have another
allies,
important issue, and I just
worse.
want your answer on this. So let's talk about the state of our military. I have here pictures of mold, feces, leaks. This is just a sample of 10 facilities out of the 500 under your leadership. Should our soldiers be living in crap? This is unacceptable, and I would hope as a commander you would think so as well.
Our troops deserve the very best living quarters, and that's why we're we're asking you to invest $1.1 billion towards unaccompanied housing in this budget request.
Actually, you have cuts of $370 million to the FSRM, Facility Sustainment, Restoration, and Modernization. You also have a cut to military construction and family housing in your budget, Mr. Secretary. So let me just ask you, for the crap and the mold and the feces, who's been fired at those installations? Who's been held accountable? Because your assistant secretary testified no one.
In terms of that particular incident or issue, I don't know of anybody that was fired. So.
That's the problem. We have a lot of talk about responsibility. you're sending the signal of no accountability. No one's been held accountable, and when that happens, as a leader, you're sending the message that this is acceptable.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Austin, General Brown. Thanks so much for being here today. I wanted to ask you about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. I know many of my colleagues have already expressed discomfort at the idea of a Rafah invasion. I'd like to add my name to those who think that it would be disastrous, not only for Palestinian civilians, but also for Israeli security. But I wanted to actually ask you about U.S. weapons in Gaza and what kind of oversight we're doing. I know, Secretary Austin, you have been a real leader in holding our own military to account on civilian casualties. I have been really grateful to work with you and make sure that we in Congress are giving you the tools you need to implement the civilian harm mitigation and response action plan that you have championed. And I know you answered to one of my colleagues that, as we've seen in many places, civilian casualties, human rights abuses can actually lead to more recruitment and violent extremist ideology, the very thing that we're often trying to address when we are doing these kinds of counterterrorism operations. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask you about some of the specific incidents we've seen. And in particular, just yesterday, Amnesty International came out with a report citing multiple examples of Israel using U.S.-made weapons in violation of international humanitarian law. As you know, as outlined in National Security Memorandum 20, both the State Department and the Department of Defense are required to conduct assessments of whether U.S. weapons are implicated in such potential violations. And while I think we both agree that Israel has a right to defend itself, how it defends itself really matters. So I was wondering, has the Department of Defense, in coordination with the State Department or on its own, conducted any such assessments of the use of U.S. weapons as required by NSM 20?
Yeah, so the State Department has a lead in providing the assessment, and we will work with the State Department as they pull together that assessment. Yeah, so.
Okay, well, I will look forward to seeing that assessment. I think that, as the memorandum says, both departments have a responsibility. I just want to go through a few of the specific incidents that they outlined in the report. And again, the report just came out yesterday, so I'm sure you haven't had a time to pour through it yet. But I think it's important to point these out. So according to this Amnesty International report that came out yesterday, an Israeli strike on January 9th reportedly used a U.S.-made, U.S.-provided GBU-39 small-diameter bomb and killed 18 civilians. According to this report, there was no indication that the residential building hit could be considered a legitimate military objective or that the people in the building were military targets. Have we conducted any sort of assessment on this particular incident?
I am not aware of that particular incident, but certainly that is one of the things that I will engage my counterpart on, as I have engaged them on a number of other things before now that relate to what we're doing to ensure that we're being as precise as possible in terms of our targeting and what we're doing to protect civilians in the battle space. But in terms of that specific report that you just mentioned, I've not seen that. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And like I said, it came out yesterday, so I didn't expect you to have read it yet. One other incident I just wanted to highlight that came out from that report was an incident from even earlier in the conflict in October of 2023. The report alleges that the Israeli military used U.S.-made Joint Direct Attack Munitions, JDAMs, in 2 airstrikes on homes full of civilians that killed 43 civilians total, 19 children. Is this an incident that you are aware of, and if so, have we done any sort of assessment of it?
I am not aware of that specific incident, but again, I have encouraged Israeli leadership to investigate thoroughly any sort of incident like this where there's a report of a loss of life, civilian loss of life, and the Minister of Defense assures me that number one, they have the right, they have adequate targeting procedures, and number two, they will follow up and investigate if there is an issue.
I appreciate that. I think it's important that given that these are U.S.-made weapons, we don't only rely on Israeli investigations, but we actually do our own assessments as well. So I will look forward to following up with you on this. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the time that I do not have.
I thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. General Brown, it's great to see you again, sir. Always enjoy having a Texan here in committee before us, especially one that's spent time out in West Texas. Secretary Austin and General Brown, would you both please answer the following questions as briefly as possible? From your perspective, what is the role of Special Operations Forces in the Department of Defense?
Special Operations Forces are clearly a remarkable advantage for us, a remarkable asset. They add value in every endeavor, and they're very difficult to train and equip in terms of the amount of time that it takes. And so, but having said that, they provide value in a number of ways, and so we treasure their contributions.
In the interest of time, General Brown, you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. When you think about a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, is there a unique role that Special Operations Forces might play there? You get both, either one of you, both of you?
Yes, there is a unique role.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. More broadly, are there still threats to American interest in the Middle East and Africa from our adversaries?
Yes.
Okay.
If you certainly consider the transnational terrorist threat an adversary, certainly.
Yes, sir. Okay, and is it fair to assume that Special Forces might be utilized to conduct operations in CENTCOM, AFRICOM, and INDOPACOM at some point in the near future?
Yes.
General, you agree?
Yes, and I would say not only Special Operations Forces, but pretty much all of our joint force can be expect to be engaged in various forms, depending on what the threat or what the situation is.
Thank you. Would you both agree that Special Operations Forces are a critical component of any of our plans in order to be successful against our adversaries, our prime adversaries in these areas?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, yes, they are, and one of several critical components.
Thank you. Would you both say that generally the demand signal for Special Operations Forces is extremely high right now?
It is high, and it's a small force, so it's a high demand, low density resource.
Thank you.
I mean, I would agree, but I would say the demand signal has changed because the environment's changed a bit, particularly in the.
Okay. And do you both think that that our Special Operations Forces are more capable than their Chinese, Russian, or Iranian counterparts?
I would tell you that our Special Operations Forces are the best in the world.
Yes, sir. I agree. Same, General? All right.
We agree.
Do you believe that our Special Operations Forces provide our military with an advantage over our adversaries?
They do. Certainly working in conjunction with conventional forces, they absolutely do.
They do.
Okay. Personally, I believe that our special forces, like you stated, are the most skilled operators in the world and provide one of the greatest advantages when we look at possible future conflicts. Unfortunately, there are proposals out there that right now that are looking to cut thousands of personnel from special operations community, and I personally believe that this is a huge mistake. I understand the budget realities that we're facing, but if we're going to be looking for ways to pay the bills in the department, surely we can find better options out there than intentionally degrading our special operations capability. I would urge each of you and my colleagues here on the committee that cutting special operations is not the answer, that we need to ensure that our special operations forces capability is adequately resourced and supported. So I just wanted to go on the record saying that. One more quick question. The Texas Panhandle is home to the Pantex plant in the United States, which is the only nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility. Most people don't know this, but the Department of Defense relies heavily on the National Nuclear Security Administration and the Department of Energy to provide the nuclear portion of our nuclear weapons. However, I'm constantly concerned that the administration does not share the urgency that each of us here in this room do with regards to nuclear modernization. At the Pantex plant, a Department of Energy facility where critical work is done to modernize the nuclear triad, there's currently work being done on the buildings that were built in the 1940s where the ceiling is literally crumbling. My concern on this is more with the National Nuclear Security Administration because the Department of Defense has been firmly committed to nuclear modernization from everything I'm told and I've seen. But we need our entire national security apparatus to be on the same page and working together. To that point, this year, the National Security Administration requested $0 for 2 key mission-enabling construction projects at Pantex, including the new analytic gas lab to replace the current one that was built in 1945. We spend all of our time talking about modernization and quality of life issues, but there appears to be somewhat of a disconnect between the Department of Defense and the rest of the executive branch when it comes to these key investments for nuclear modernization. So I'm running out of time here. I just want to make sure that I got on the record saying that I hope that you guys can continue to support us and work with those other
Gentleman's
organizations.
time's expired. Chair, now recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Austin, General Brown, for taking the time to speak with us this morning. It's good to see you again. I hope you're feeling well, Mr. Secretary. I have the privilege of representing New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District, home to White Sands Missile Range and the Trinity site, the location of the first ever atomic weapons test. Now, Secretary, you may be familiar with what's been happening in Congress over the last year regarding RECA and expanding RECA in particular, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Now, in New Mexico, we're unfortunately sometimes known as the nation's nuclear dumping ground and also the nuclear weapons testing site of the Trinity site, the first ever atomic bomb tested in New Mexico by the federal government. Now, we haven't had the compensation for the folks who have suffered and their generations of families who have suffered subsequently for that nuclear bomb testing. We're also home to places like the Jackpile mine, right outside of Laguna Pueblo, where uranium mining has taken place for years without proper remediation that has contaminated water sources and that has also impacted those miners. So we desperately need help for the folks that are in New Mexico that have suffered from the impacts of what the federal government caused. So, without warning, nearly 500,000 New Mexicans within a 150-mile radius of the Trinity site were exposed to deadly ionizing radiation and given no information about the dangers of radioactive effects following the test. Let me say that again, Secretary, without warning. Now that several of my Republican colleagues have supported RECA reform, folks like Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, Representative James Moylan from Guam, I believe it's imperative that we pass RECA reform. Secretary Austin, does the Department of Defense apologize on the record for exposing New Mexicans to deadly radiation during the Trinity test?
Well, let me just say up front that the safety and health and welfare of our troops and our families is very important to us, as well as health and welfare of the community members. And so this is something we take very seriously. And of course, you know, we would want to ensure that everyone that's been disadvantaged is compensated. But I would point out to you that the Department of Justice is the lead agency for in terms of overseeing the compensation program. So.
And Secretary, do you believe that a harm done by the federal government should be fixed by the federal government?
I do.
Okay. Do you think an apology is in order for all those generations of families that have not received proper compensation for exposure to deadly radiation?
If there's something that you know, community members have suffered because of our action, then certainly we should apologize for that. So.
Thank you. So would you support additional expansion of RECA to compensate the victims of radiation?
Well, certainly. I'm in favor of making sure that people who have been disadvantaged are adequately compensated. So I support that. Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate it. And that's why I'm fighting to reauthorize and expand RECA in this year's NDAA to finally bring justice to these communities like those in New Mexico and beyond who have been suffering for far too long. Thank you both for your dedicated service General Secretary, to our country, and for all you do to support our brave service members in uniform. With that, I yield back my time. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes a gentlelady from South Carolina, Ms. Mace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Austin and General Brown. Thank you for being here today. Secretary Austin, under your COVID-19 vaccine mandate on our service members, more than 8,400 service members were discharged for declining to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Those 8,400 men and women served our country honorably, and you turned each of these soldiers, sailors, and airmen and women into veterans overnight. The fiscal year 2023 NDAA rescinded this mandate, but 8 months later, only 43 service members had sought to rejoin, just 0.5%. That is why, as part of fiscal year 2024 NDAA, Congress established a process to reinstate service members who were discharged due to your actions. How many of these service members have been reinstated since the passage of the 2024 NDAA?
Well, I don't have that number at my fingertips, but I would tell you that each of the services certainly have procedures. If somebody wants to reapply to join the military, then they can certainly do that. So. And then
why has the Department of Defense failed to convince more of these service members to rejoin, you think?
Again, it's a personal choice by the former service members to make that decision. So if they want to come back, there's a method to do that.
Can you describe the efforts of the DoD, what efforts they have made to recruit these service members to rejoin?
I don't know of any efforts that have been made to recruit from that population. So.
Well, given our shortcomings, our shortfalls in recruiting, don't you think that might be a pot of folks that we would want to try to recruit back to rejoin, or no?
Yeah, as you may have heard me say earlier, I think our services are doing well in terms of turning the trend around, and really are, in most cases, going to make their recruiting goals.
Well, to that end, by how much did the military services collectively miss their recruiting goals in fiscal year 2023?
Well, let's talk about 2024, what the services are projecting.
My question was about 2023. How badly did they miss their goals?
There were a number of services that missed their objectives.
Approximately, the answer is approximately 41,000. Could retaining the 8,400...
But having said that, I know you've talked to the Army and to other services already, and they have probably told you that their forecast is that they're going to meet their recruiting goals, and that's because they've done the right things and investing in the right kind of advertisement, investing in the right types of recruiters, establishing contacts with the right centers of influence, and telling the military story and what military service offers you.
Yeah, and I hope you're right. I really, truly do. I come from a military family where almost everyone serves, and I hope that we do meet those goals sooner rather than later. Today is the last day of April, the last day of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so I want to turn to a topic that is deeply personal and deeply important to me, particularly as a woman. I was deeply disturbed to learn last year the 1st Army Special Trial Counsel had to be fired because emails came to light where he said things like sexual assault ridiculousness. The sexual assault ridiculousness continues. He also wrote that Congress and our political masters are dancing by the fire of misleading statistics and one-sided repetitive misinformation by those with an agenda. He later downplayed the issue of sexual assault as sobriety regret, end quote. So Secretary Austin, how can victims of sexual assault, like myself, have confidence in coming forward when the Army or military, anyone, hires someone that says these things to lead the special division to handle their cases, and how the hell did the DoD miss this in the vetting process?
Well, I don't know specifically how Army missed that, but I can tell you that once the Secretary of the Army was aware of the issue, then she took action, and which you would expect her to do. And again, that in and of itself proves that we're serious about sexual assault, sexual abuse. And again, this individual, as you pointed out, would have been in charge of ensuring that we live up to our standards and making sure that cases are appropriately referred and tried, and so a very important person in the chain. And so the Secretary of the Army did what she thought was best.
And do you think women should have confidence in the military to come forward when they are assaulted. Is the military doing everything they can to ensure that those women get justice when they've been assaulted or raped?
I absolutely believe that, and I know that there's still in some cases, a reluctance to report assault or abuse, and so we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable that they can come forward, report, and there will be.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair now
Thank you,
recognizes
Mr. Chairman.
gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, when you came before this committee last year, we briefly talked about infrastructure investments. You stated then that it's absolutely important that the department does everything it can to ensure that it continues to update its infrastructure. Now, I know that the department has had to make some tough choices in its fiscal year 2025 budget request to align with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which I regret imposes harsh caps on both defense and domestic spending. However, I am struck by the fact that the department's FY25 budget proposed reductions in facilities, sustainment, restoration and modernization funding by $370 million and military construction by $117 million compared to the fiscal 24 enacted levels. Indo-PACOM's unfunded priorities list further identifies over $3.3 billion in MILCON priorities that aren't included in this year's budget. Given all that, Mr. Secretary, how confident are you that your budget request includes and prioritizes adequate funding that we need to sustain and build infrastructure, especially in the Indo-Pacific, where our state is located, where these investments are critical to our posture and force projection?
Yeah, we continue to invest in infrastructure. It is really important. In some cases, we have to make up for lost time, and in terms of investments that should have been made years ago, in terms of restoration and other things that weren't made. In this budget, we're asking you for $2.2 billion for family housing. We're asking you for $1.1 billion for unaccompanied housing, and in terms of the Indo-Pacific and the Pacific Deterrent Initiative that you mentioned, and we're asking for $9.9 billion there, and some of that will go into infrastructure. And over the last 3 years, we've asked you for $20 billion in support of infrastructure, and we're very grateful for the support that you provided, and we'll continue to work at this.
Thank you. Well, the bottom line is we need numbers of that sort if we continue to defer investments in our repair and maintenance in previous years. And so if we are going to be true to investing and supporting infrastructure, we have to invest now. We need to put our money where our mouth is so that we can better manage the risks and the cost that comes with extreme deferred infrastructure investments. And we need to make sure that we build and sustain the infrastructure we need to compete with our adversaries and to take care of our soldiers and their families as well. I want to pivot right now to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. I know many of my colleagues have asked questions about that today, and I share their concerns as to how U.S.-supplied weapons are being used by the Israel Defense Forces and whether adequate steps are being taken to protect civilian life, especially with the looming operation in Rafah. This includes reports of an October 31st airstrike on the Jabalia refuge camp that killed over 125 people and may have involved a U.S.-provided bomb, the possible use of white phosphorus in areas populated by civilians on October 16th, and the continuing use of U.S.-made precision-guided missiles and artillery in Israel's defense. Mr. Secretary, would you please describe the department's efforts to conduct end-use monitoring of U.S.-provided weapons to Israel in this conflict, specifically to determine the credibility of the written assurances provided by the Israeli government pursuant to NSM 20?
The vast majority of equipment that the Israelis use is provided by the United States in terms of air-ground munitions, and I think everybody's aware of that. The Israeli military is a professional force. Our expectation is that they conduct their operations as professionals would, and that they account for civilians in the battle space and make sure that they have good targeting processes and they follow those processes. In terms of making sure that we're engaging the Israelis on these issues, I do that every week as I talk to my counterpart in Israel. This is one of the things that I really emphasize routinely. And again, it's been a tough battle.
Mr. Secretary,
there's been far too many civilians that have been.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Secretary, if I'm hearing you right, then we're taking them on their word that they are abiding by the provisions in NSM 20? Are we doing any of our own monitoring and use monitoring to make sure that we know exactly how that's being done to prevent the loss of life, civilian casualties?
Well, as you know, in accordance with NSM 20, we'll have to provide, the State Department in conjunction with Defense will have to provide an assessment on whether or not they are doing just that. And
so in a week or
progress.
so when we are to get that report, then it's going to show us with some credibility that you're not just taking them on their word, that you have actually been able to show that, in fact, these weapons have not been used in ways that they should not be.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Secretary Austin, General Brown, Mr. McCord. Thank you all for being here today. A phrase we've heard routinely from senior leadership at the Pentagon is production deterrence. The Alabama way of saying this is we got to keep the clip full. The missile industrial base needs stable production expectations, expanded capability, and resilient supply chain. I've been a licensed emergency medical technician for almost 35 years, and one of the contractors back home explained it to me like this. It's hard to run a missile industrial base when your demand signals look like a heart monitor. Ordering 150 one year, none the next. 150 the next year, none the next. We've been reminded in the past year the criticality of increasing our air and missile defense capacity, especially in Israel and the Middle East. The Secretary of the Navy recently shared that we have expended $1 billion in missile inventories in the Red Sea mission, which included the use of the SM-3 missile in combat for the first time to defeat Iranian ballistic missiles. Just last week, I went to the groundbreaking in Huntsville for a facility expansion where 60% of the work is for the SM-3-1B. This is initiated after demand signals in recent years to crank up production. Despite this, the department has now proposed termination of the SM-3-1B. I'm especially worried about the workforce and what this is, the signal this is sent. One, I understand the Constraint and Financial Responsibility Act, so what I would like to know from you is, was this just a budget decision despite our commitment over the last 2 years to protect missile funding for critical munitions? Are we again using missiles as a bill payer to meet the priorities?
As we discussed earlier, we certainly had to make tough choices as we built our budget requests based upon the FRA. But since Raytheon is a prime vendor for this weapon system, I'll take your question for the record out of an abundance of caution. There, as you know, I used to serve on the board of Raytheon. So.
Okay. Thank you. Given the sudden change in plans, I'd like to ask that you provide this committee the analysis supporting the termination decision, including analysis of the SM-3 capability against current and future threats, risks to the industrial base and workforce, and the ability of the Navy to meet missile defense requirements with significantly fewer effectors. Secretary Austin, I'd like to thank the department for sticking to the facts and doing what is best for national security as it conducts the Inspector General and GAO investigation into the Space Command base decision. I'm confident that should the department continue in pursuit of the truth, it will once again find Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama to be the best place for Space Command and best for national security. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Austin and General Brown, for being here today. I want to focus a little bit on child care, and I appreciate in your submitted remarks that you pointed out that the FY 2025 budget is focusing on efforts to make child care more affordable. But for the past year, what I have been hearing as I visit installations across Virginia as late as Friday when I was at Fort Gregg Adams is affordability is only part of the issue, and for many of these installations, it's the lack of sufficient workforce to meet the demand. And so I wanted to ask if you could elaborate what the DoD is doing to help increase the workforce, including making the ability to do background checks a little bit faster, because I hear that seems to be the long pole in the tent.
We are doing things to speed up the amount of time that it takes to conduct background checks, and you are right, that has been an issue of concern for a number of people for quite some time. We're also doing things to incentivize workers working for us in the child care arena. If you're an employee, for example, if you want your child to be enrolled in that child care center, we've reduced the cost of for the first child by 50%. And there are other things that we're doing to try to make it more attractive for us to more attractive for people to come work for us. But this is there's stiff competition, as you know, in this area, and we've just got to continue to do more to attract the right people to join us and stay with us. And we've seen some improvement, but there's more to be done yet. So.
Thank you. I know this is not just a problem for the DoD, it's a problem in the civilian world as well, but if there are more resources or assistance that we can provide, please let us know. On mental health and suicide prevention, these are also difficult issues we continue to grapple with. In September of 2023, you signed off on a memo with over 100 actions to prevent military suicide, targeting 5 primary lines of effort. And can you tell us today how the department is beginning to implement those directives and how we can be supportive?
Well, we are implementing them, and of course, I am personally involved in this because it's really important to me, and I routinely engage service leadership in terms of what they're doing and how they're making healthcare or mental health care more available to their troops, and so this remains a focus for the department from the top to the bottom. But it's still a very, competitive market. There's just not enough healthcare providers, mental health care providers, and the demand is pretty significant. We've done some things like make telehealth care available, and that's helped the people who are working and living in remote areas. And again, there's much more that we need to do, but it will remain a very competitive market because there's just not enough providers out there in the civilian world or in the military. So.
Thank you. We had the opportunity to speak with leadership for AFRICOM in a posture hearing earlier following the military coup in Niger, and since then we have seen a further weakening of the American position in Africa as our troops have been ordered to leave Chad as well as Niger, 2 nations that are vitally important to our counterterrorism efforts. And you may not have time to answer this, so for the record, if you could provide how the department is working to prevent similar troop evictions from our African partners and what the department is doing to strengthen ties with our partners in Africa. Would love to have that submitted for the record.
Okay. We will submit it for the record.
Thank you. And finally, I would just say after my visit to Fort Gregg Adams, one of the challenges I think with meeting recruitment goals is the fact that particularly since COVID, the inability to be more further integrated in the communities. And Fort Gregg Adams is a good example where you have 2 military museums, a great new exhibit on the 6888, and Black women who participated in the war effort, and yet civilians have a hard time getting on campus to see them. If there's anything we can do to help you meet that balance between providing security at the gate, but allowing more people from the
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Kiggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to General Brown and Secretary Austin, Mr. McCord, for being here with us and for your service to our great nation. I know we've had a lot of us speak today about the defense budget being inadequate and our concerns with that. Just noteworthy, a takeaway from a brief I went to about the pier that is being established off of Israel. $330 million was the price tag that we were given. 1,100 servicemen and women from Virginia who are being sent there, in my opinion, in harm's way. So that unilateral action, I sometimes question our priorities about how are we prioritizing the inadequate defense budget that we do have. But that raises a lot of questions. I want to echo some of the words of my colleague about the F-35 and had my staff print on our break about the GAO report, which is quite scathing if you haven't had a chance to read it. I was shocked to just hear about and read about the sustainment costs that have increased 44%. So they went from $1.1 trillion in 2018 to $1.58 trillion in 2023. So since 2014, they made 43 recommendations to improve the department's operations sustainment of the F-35 program, and that DoD has implemented only a few of them. So 30% remain unimplemented. So about 70% of those recommendations remain unimplemented. Do you know what the Department of Defense is going to be doing in order to get those F-35s off of the flight line in Texas? They're not doing us any good sitting on the flight line. I also want to put a shout out for places like Naval Air Station Oceana in my district, the East Coast Master Jet Base. We need those F-35. Let's get them in the fleet. Let's get the pipelines going for maintenance, for operations, for manufacturing, so that we can maybe reduce some costs that way. But do you have plans in mind for how we can get those F-35s into the fleet and reduce those costs?
Yeah, I can take part of it, partly because I was, as the Air Force chief that I was 7 months ago, part of the conversation here was to make sure that we're getting what we pay for. And at that point, Lockheed Martin was basically getting to TR3, which is the tech refresh to get to Block 4, which is the capability required for our pacing threat, was not on time. And that's what's driving part of the conversation of being able to get those airplanes from Lockheed Martin and getting them out to the field so they can be employed. And
why is it not on time? And what are we doing to make sure that it will be on time?
Well, it's engaging with the industry. And I'll just tell you, in my last role as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I sat down with 3 of our CEOs from our industry partners that have a key role in this to tell them we have a problem. We have a problem that we have to work together to make sure that we provide the capability that we're paying for.
Please provide that oversight and hold their feet to the fire, because I hear from my friends, the F-18 pilots who are flying only F-18s out of Oceana, that they're having to change their tactics on a weekly basis to keep up with the Chinese. If we have better equipment out there for them, let's get it in their hands so they can start practicing for it so we can be ready for that fight tonight. Also, I had the privilege of sitting on the Recruitment Retention Quality of Life Task Force, which I'm hoping that you all have a copy of the Quality of Life panel report that we put together with some great changes in there. I want to hear from you all how, we're going to do our part in the NDA side and implement these changes in that, but how are you all going to get these messages out to Americans that we hear you, we are working on those things, we've improved pay, we've heard you about childcare, we're expanding that, we're working on healthcare, spouse employment, housing. How are we going to get that word out to the American people? Because it hurts my heart when I hear from parents in my district who are veterans like myself, who are telling me, I'm telling my kids not to sign up to be in the military. And as a mom of children who do serve, I know what life looks like out there for them. So we need to get this message that we've heard them. We are putting good plans in place for change, but I don't know if there's a new PR, some of our money can go to a big PR campaign, or what are we going to do to get that message to Americans?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the tremendous work. And yeah, I have gone through the report, and my staff, along with the Joint Staff, is looking at it to make sure that everything that we can do to implement the things that you guys have brought forward, and certainly we're going to take that on. But I will tell you that we've done a lot. One of my areas of focus has been taking care of people. And that's why, again, I asked you for a pay raise in 23 of 4.6%. Last year, or 24, I asked you for a pay raise of 5.2%, the biggest pay raise in 20 years. Yeah. And this year, we're asking you for 4.5%.
And happy to do those things, and I just have a few more seconds left, but I just wanted to share. My Naval Academy son said, they used to tell us that the Naval Academy might not have the best equipment or best resources out there, but we have the best people out there. So those kids grow up thinking that. We need to make sure we're taking care of those people, and I just really appreciate you prioritizing that. Thank you so much. My time's expired.
Chair now recognizes a gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Davis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses, to Secretary Austin, to the General Brown. And I want to thank you in particular for your service to our country and keeping the American people safe. Over 2 weeks ago, the fearless airmen of the 335th Fighter Squadron shot down 63 attack drones headed for Israel. The Air Force is planning to divest an entire combat squadron of Strike Eagles next year in one of the most economically distressed counties in all of North Carolina. If you look at the region, it rates extremely high by measurements of economically distressed. My question is, Mr. Secretary, Congress has directed the Department of Defense to modernize. However, if we can still possibly uphold our national security interests while protecting local economies, as it may have a devastating impact in communities, how do you see the department considering then this local impact on communities?
Well, with every change that we make, this is something that we certainly consider, and we try to work with local authorities where possible to mitigate the impact if it's possible to do that. I agree with you, by the way. I thank you for applauding the work of our tremendous fighter pilots. They did extraordinary work there a couple of weeks ago, but it just goes to show you the quality of people that we have in our ranks. I know General Brown was a part of those decisions to modernize and invest in a different type of platform. And
Mr.
why we
Secretary,
did that, you may want to speak to that.
let me ask this question. I'm just trying to understand because it's come up now in terms of the engagement with the local community. And I'm trying to understand what level of engagement has taken place with the local community in North Carolina.
Well, I can't speak for the Air Force, but I just know based on past experience when we, as we started to make decisions of our basing and either modernization or divestment, we do engage with the local community because it's important to us that we maintain a positive relationship with the communities that we live and operate in and around. And so, you know, I expect that the Air Force is, and if they haven't, we'll make sure they do engage.
But to your knowledge, you're not aware of personally any level of engagement with Wayne County?
I'm not, because I've been a bit separated from this particular topic for a number of months now.
Okay. And during the time that you were engaged in this topic, were you aware of any engagement?
Well, at that time, this is before the decision was made, so we don't get ahead of a decision to start engaging, if you might understand that.
Let me ask this question. When we think about Strike Eagles in particular, the unique capability of this aircraft across combatant commands, would we agree that this is a unique platform? Yes, no?
Oh, I mean...
It is, and we want the best variant of the F-15 that we can possibly get in our inventory, and we want one that's going to be help us be decisive in the future contest.
With that understanding, it would appear to me too that we would be concerned about maybe any gaps in delivery. And I would just be on record as sharing that concern, any gaps in delivery, and taking any steps to avoid any devastating impact when we can still uphold our national security interests. So thank you so much for being before us today. Thank you for what y'all continue to do for the American people. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today at this important hearing. Secretary Austin, you know, recently we passed a Ukraine aid supplemental. It was a little dicey, a little contentious, but at the end of the day, it passed. Now I think comes some of the difficult conversations, and that is accountability. Because something tells me that we'll probably ask for more in the future. So just as to try and be proactive, I would say, Section 504 states that you, as the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State Blinken, are required to report to Congress on a concrete strategy for U.S. support to Ukraine in their war with Russia. My question is simple, and you have 45 days to do it. I believe that report is due on June 8th. Do you believe that you will have that report by June 8th?
We will do everything within our power to meet the suspense, and we have discussed this issue a number of times in our briefings.
So we should look forward to it on the 8th?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Confident on that?
Again, we're going to do everything possible to make the suspense.
I'm not sure what that means. Are we hedging our bets, or does the deadline matter and we'll have it to us on June 8th?
That means yes. We're going to,
okay.
We have a suspense to meet. We're going to try to meet it. So.
What do you anticipate might be some of the delays in your trying to meet it?
Right now, I don't see any delays. So again, this is important. We'll make sure that you have the information that you've asked for.
Thank you. Have you begun the required consultations with Secretary Blinken on the strategy?
Have I conducted consultations with Secretary Blinken on a strategy? We've discussed the Ukrainian the strategy for Ukraine with the National Security Council a number of times. So yes, as a part of the larger group, yes.
Wonderful. Can you give this committee kind of a preview on what some of those concrete, achievable objectives are?
Yeah, and we've been consistent on this throughout. Our goal for Ukraine is to be to make sure Ukraine is a democratic, independent, sovereign country with the ability to defend itself and deter aggression in the future. So.
And you're confident we're on track?
Those are achievable goals, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, my constituents, have concerns about this. And I hope that you'll work with this committee and our committee to really ensure that, one, this report comes in time and it lays out an actual legitimate, measurable strategy for the aid that we've given and any continued aid going forward. I think the American people need to know that. At the end of the day, it is their tax dollars, and I also think it would be much more palatable if we had these concrete objectives met in a measurable time. So I look forward to June 8th. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and to the ranking member, Secretary Austin, Chairman Brown. It's good to see you again, and General Brown, congratulations on a very well-deserved appointment, and I look forward to continuing our work together. Chairman Brown, this year's budget request enables the U.S. to plan, train, and exercise alongside our allies and partners worldwide. Last week, a new survey from Gallup found that the United States is no longer viewed as the most influential global power in Africa, having been surpassed by China. This comes as China is Africa's biggest trading partner and continues to increase its investment in the continent. We know that the U.S. is the partner of choice for many of these countries. How does this budget allow us to re-engage with nations who are caught choosing between us and the PRC, and what more can we be doing in this regard?
Well, the way this budget helps us is how we invest in our readiness, how we are able to work in our exercise program, and our ability to engage with the various nations, not only Africa, but around the world. And as you said, we are the nation of choice in many cases. And for those nations that share our values, we're able to work very closely with them. That's something that we've got to continue to engage and stay engaged. And this is where AFRICOM, in particular, is working, having talked to General Langley on this topic here several times over the course of the past several weeks.
Thank you. And Secretary Austin, how important is it to increase our competitive defense activities with our allies and our partners, and what direct benefits will this have on our defense industrial base?
How important is it to increase our activity with allies and partners? It's fundamental to our strategy, sir. As you take a look at our defense strategy, you know, our strengthening our relationships with allies and partners is fundamental to that. And you've seen us do that, not only in the European theater, but also, most important, in the Indo-Pacific as well. If you take a look at the numbers of countries that we strengthen our relationship with, I think it's really impressive. And in some cases, we've created a generational capability that I think will add significant value to deterrence going forward. AUKUS is one of those things that I'm talking about. So.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, as you know, my district includes Creech Air Force Base, Hawthorne Army Depot, and Nellis Air Force Base. I'm happy to see that there are investments in the construction, maintenance, and cleanup of military housing and the department's commitment to resilient and healthy defense communities. But sometimes in rural communities that are often lacking basic services, including housing. So how is the department applying that commitment to rural bases in particular, like the ones in my district, to ensure that our service members and their families have the resources that they need to carry out their important missions?
Well, all of our bases are important, and we understand that in many cases the rural areas are most challenged, and so I think it's important to all of us, the service secretaries, to make sure that they're doing the right things to apportion resources so that you know, we're taking care of our troops and taking care of our families. So that's a thing that will remain a priority for service secretaries and myself going forward. But you know, each service is a little different. So
I'll continue to bring those priorities up and appreciate your leadership. Finally, Secretary Austin, in December, Deputy Secretary Hicks tasked offices across the department with developing plans to implement the 17 recommendations from the internal review team on racial disparities in the investigative and military justice systems. These plans of action and milestones were due to the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness last week. The Deputy Secretary also initiated immediate policy changes to increase service member protections. Recently, a RAND report found that black men in the Air Force junior enlisted ranks are 86% more likely than their white counterparts to face non-judicial punishment or court-martial. Secretary Austin, every day our military grows more diverse, and I believe it is critical that we support policies that ensure our forces can work as a cohesive team, and that means addressing disparities that affect our military service members, particularly those of color. So I would like to work with you on this issue and would ask that you provide an overview on the plan of action to implement the recommendation and what immediate policy changes that will be needed.
Gentleman's time's
service
expired.
member
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to address the recent crisis in our recruiting, in our military. And it's heartening to see that the Marines have met the recruiting goals over the last 3 years and the Space Force since their inception. But unfortunately, it's not the case with the three largest branches. And Chairman Brown, I would like to discuss it with you. I mean, the Air Force missed their recruiting goal by 11% in FY23. The Navy in the last 2 years, 20% in FY23 and 36%, which is very alarming, over a third this year so far. And then the Army missed out over the last 3 years by 25%, 23%, and 16%. So clearly, this is absolutely unsustainable. And would you agree that this is this persistent recruiting shortfalls? These are have reached crisis levels, and it's an existential threat to our republic.
What I will tell you, you're right. The numbers you said aren't sustainable. But as we look at the numbers for 24, almost all the services are going to meet their goal. The one service that's having probably a bit more challenges is the Navy, but they're all at 90% or above as far as to meet the goal for recruiting for this particular year. So I do see a positive trend line based on our recruiting.
You'd agree, though, General, that if this is sustained, that we're in some serious trouble.
Well, what I would tell you is we need to stay on the path we're on and continue the upward trend.
So with specificity, what new innovative approaches are we using in recruiting to ensure that this doesn't happen?
Well, part of it is that, we've got to be out and able to engage. And that's, because of COVID, we weren't able to get into the high schools. But it's not just into the high schools, but it's how we do our marketing. It's how we engage with our local communities. It's how we engage with our influencers, whether it's coaches, parents, guidance counselors, to talk about the value of service.
And I apologize because of limited time, but would you agree that if there's school systems out there that aren't allowing the military access, then they should be, we should consider withholding federal funding?
Well, I'm not going to tell you how best to do it, but I think we should have access to those schools because as an all-volunteer force, and our service members help protect their rights.
So when I read you and the Secretary's written statements and heard your testimony earlier today, there were some really neat buzzwords. Most formidable fighting force in history, a strategic approach. We're going to strengthen our integrated deterrence. We're going to confront threats. We're going to fight and win. We're going to hone warfighting skills. We're going to have strategic imperatives. We're going to face rapidly evolving threats. We're going to defeat those threats. We're going to outpace our competitors and unparalleled combat capabilities across all domains. All these things that sound great. And then the best possible stewards of our hard-earned taxpayer dollars. We have to be those stewards. So I want to bring to your attention, Secretary Austin, an article that was written by the Department of Army on June 22nd, 2023, and a tweet that the DOD sent out on July 2nd of last year. And it's a tweet of a biological man who's now, I'm sure, I would imagine, being held to dress and physical fitness standards of a woman. And the quote on the tweet said, Major Rachel Jones found solace after coming out as a transgender female. Her journey from battling depression and suicidal thoughts to embracing authenticity inspires us all. So my question is, why would Major Jones have been elevated above all of the other roughly 1.4 million active duty service members and given the honor of this visible recognition and thrust out to the world as the face of the United States military on the 2nd of July of last year? Was it an act of heroism? Was valor on display? Was it a commitment to world-class fitness? That doesn't look like it. Was it a tremendous achievement or elite leadership? Or was it simply that there was a biological man who wants to be a woman and wave political flags while in uniform?
I'm not familiar with Major Jones's case, but I certainly will become so. Again, and whether or not the major was elevated for recognition or reward over others.
The tweet, Secretary, was just about being transgender. There wasn't anything about coming up with an incredible cyber security program to protect it. It was just simply that Major Jones is transgender, above all 1.4 million others.
And so you're implying that that the major was
elevated above everyone else.
Elevated over other troops because
if Major Jones did something excellent, then I could care less. But it was simply a political statement, and I'm sure the communists in Beijing are quaking in their boots and now won't invade Taiwan because Rachel has authenticity. Or heck, there could be a unilateral withdrawal by the Russians from Ukraine because Rachel's so inspiring. I mean, we got to focus more on projecting power and a hell of a lot less on projecting pronouns. I yield back.
Again, I'd like to answer that.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Texas. Oh, I'm sorry, the gentleman from Texas. I got the state right, Mr. Veazey. Mr. Veazey's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, I brought this up to you a couple of years ago, but wanted to bring it back to your attention. As you know, the 80th anniversary of D-Day is about to occur. And, one of the sad stories about D-Day, and Hollywood has done this, and the Longest Day did it, Steven Spielberg did it with Saving Private Ryan. The African-American soldiers of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion have been erased from their part on the beaches of Omaha and what happened on that day on June 6th, 1944. And Linda Hervo wrote a book called Forgotten about those soldiers. and talked about their ordeal and everything they went through leading up to that day on June 6, 1944. And there was one soldier, Corporal Waverly Woodson, that should have received the Medal of Honor, and he still has not received it. And I know that his family would like for him to receive the Medal of Honor, and Linda Herveau has done a great job of documenting and finding documents that support his claim for the Medal of Honor. And I was wondering, have you done or heard anything more about where Corporal Woodson's posthumously Medal of Honor is right now?
Well, first of all, let me say that our country remains grateful for the tremendous sacrifices and service of our World War II veterans. In terms of this specific recommendation for Medal of Honor, I've not received a recommendation for Medal of Honor yet.
Yeah. How would someone bring that to your attention? Because this is a big deal for this family, and I think for this country too, because these soldiers of the 320th, and as you know, because I saw you on the History Channel talking about a plaque, I believe it was in Georgia or Alabama, that there was a group of African-American soldiers that just now got their recognition for something that they did during World War II, and you did very good in that documentary. But this particular day is such a big deal in American history, and we need these veterans to be recognized, and particularly this one. How would we bring that and get it in front of you to make sure that it gets a thorough review, that Corporal Woodson and his family can see him receive this Medal of Honor posthumously?
For soldiers, it would the recommendation would have to be presented to the Department of the Army, and if the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary of the Army concur that this individual meets the requirements for that award, then that recommendation would come forward to me.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you, one of the things that a lot of my Republican colleagues, moving on from that, one of the things that my Republican colleagues have talked a lot about is the term that they call wokeism. And you've been here, you've been a part of the hearings and heard a lot of the things that they're bringing up. And it worries me about how the department is planning to address and mitigate the issues of racism, because my biggest fear is that someone hearing, hey, we're going to attack wokeism, that that is going to make black and other soldiers of color more vulnerable and have their issues of racism and sexism taken less seriously, because it'll just be dismissed as quote unquote wokeism. How is the department planning to address and mitigate concerns of racism and sexism that still continue to exist to this day, some which are structural, with all of the rhetoric around sort of watering down a lot of these concerns?
Thank you, sir. We'll do what we've always done and we continue to do, and that is make sure that leaders create the right climate for all of our troops to not only be able to be effective in, but also grow and thrive in. And I would remind everybody that we have the most combat credible force in the world, and we endeavor to continue to make it better. The fact that we get contributions from every segment in society is a great thing. Our military looks like America, and that's what you would expect. And we want to make sure that people in our force understand that if they do the work and they meet the qualifications, and they will continue to excel, continue to be promoted.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Alford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The increase of $7.9 billion above the FY24 defense budget to $849.8 billion top line for a 25 defense budget represents a 0.9% increase in defense spending. Accounting for inflation, it's really a cut to the defense budget, and with that cut, I understand the department is faced with some tough choices. The effect of these cuts can be seen in the Navy's request for only one Virginia-class attack submarine and the Air Force's request for 6 fewer F-35s and 18 instead of 24 F-15EXs, among other requests for less across the DoD. I'm really concerned about the cap that we placed on defense spending as we're trying to deter two near-peer adversaries. Also want to talk a little bit about Taiwan. I just recently got back there from Taiwan, meeting with President Tsai and others. They're really concerned, as am I, about the $19 billion in the weapons backlog. I believe quite a few F-16s that need to be there by 2026, Harpoon missiles. Mr. Secretary, what are we doing to reduce this backlog?
Thanks, sir. Well, you may have heard me say earlier that, 3 years ago, I stood up a task force to really look at this backlog and figure out what the obstacles are. And this, the FMS process is a complicated process that involves a lot of different moving parts. And that Tiger team is still in existence. It identified a number of things that we needed to we could do to speed things up, and where we can, we have done those things. But my charter to them is to keep working things and keep moving this forward as fast as we can.
Okay, let me interrupt you. I'm sorry, sir. I know General Bacon did ask about this previously, and I know you've got a plan, you've got somebody looking at this, but with a possible invasion at 2027, and I know some generals have said that, and Xi Jinping is reducing his timeline. He's gone from 2035. He is ramping up aggression and coercion economically and socially. They are crossing the line in the Taiwan Straits every day now, not just once a month. But this is picking up. The storm is coming. What are we going to do to help Taiwan prepare for a proper defense against the communist powers of China?
In accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, we will continue to provide Taiwan assistance to defend it, to help defend itself, and we've been doing that over time. We remain focused on their needs and getting security assistance to them as quickly as we possibly can. And again, some of this involves industry, as you know,
right?
And it's easy to say I can spin the dial and force industry to produce something quicker. Not always that easy. But we are committed to working with industry to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to move as rapidly as possible. When we recognize that there are challenges that a number of countries can present, I personally don't see a conflict with China being imminent or inevitable. But again, we have to be prepared, and we got to make sure that if something like that happens, we are dominant in the battle space. And that's our goal, and that's what we're working towards every day.
Well, I agree with you, sir. I think the best, of course, you're much more of an expert than I, but we've got to help in the deterrence and not let this get to a point where there is kinetic conflict. I want to skip back to Ukraine just a little bit, because I know that you said, I forgot your exact quote about kind of defining what victory looks like, that they end up with a democracy and a sovereign nation. But what does that mean? What does victory look back? Is it like, is it taking back Crimea? Is it pre-1991 borders? We have got no clear definition of what the end game is. How much are we in this for our taxpayers? How long will this last? And it's really hard to sell continuing supplemental packages to the folks back home in the Missouri's 4th Congressional District when we get no clear definition.
Well, again, we do want to see Ukraine as a democracy that's independent and a sovereign nation, and again, with the ability to defend itself and deter aggression in the future. And we are doing things to help them build that capability.
I'm sorry, we're out of time. I appreciate your answer, but it does not answer the question of what does victory look like. America deserves
Gentleman's
an
time's
answer.
expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the three gentlemen who are here for so long and testifying. I appreciate your being here today. Secretary Austin, I want to thank you for your focus on naval innovation. On one hand, we've demonstrated how investing early in innovative technology enables us to deter advanced threats through our successful operations in the Red Sea. On the other hand, though, Ukraine can demonstrate our lack of flexibility in being able to support rapid innovation. This is why I believe, and I hope you believe, why we need naval-focused innovation, especially at a center that offers efficient, effective, and economical solutions for both today's battles and tomorrow's conflicts. Innovation is deterrence, and I'm glad to be working with Navy Secretary Del Toro on the Naval Innovation Center at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, of course, in the 19th Congressional District. This center will leverage the private sector and DoD innovation hubs by merging them with the MPS's students to address strategic competition and irregular warfare in a collaborative and classified setting. I look forward to working together on the NIC with you in the coming years to provide innovative solutions quickly and at scale. Now, moving on, but keeping focus on providing solutions at speed, I'm concerned about the recent developments in the Sahel, a region that I've termed, and I've heard termed before, as the déjà coups. Understandably, considering there's been 8 military takeovers since 2020 in basically an area that really is a hotbed of terrorism. It is becoming a danger to the United States. I said in a recent hearing when General Langley sat right where you were at, that we are at an inflection point when it comes to the Sahel. We're either going to double down or we fold. Right now, it looks like we're going to be folding, but we're at a standstill. And we're trying to figure out how we can play that next hand, understandably so. We saw in Niger that we're drafting plans to withdraw about 1,000 U.S. troops after failed attempts to revise our military agreements. It's not just a trend of Niger's military junta kicking out U.S. partners, including France and the EU. Now we're seeing about 100 Russia soldiers sweeping in for security training, and then there's just recent reports about this anti-aircraft device that they're bringing in as well. The situation in Chad looks just as bad. As we heard on April 25th, we received notice that the Pentagon would withdraw about 75 Army Special Forces. Like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, there are reports that Russia is growing its foothold in Chad as well. What we're seeing in this area is a trend. Pushas take control. They oust Western security partners, they invite Russians in, and there's a resurgence of VEOs and terrorist attacks. It literally is becoming one of the most dangerous stretches of territory in the world. That is why last year I worked with Representative Scott to designate Chad, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso as qualified hazardous duty areas to grant our service members stationed there so that they can get tax exclusion benefits in recognition of the threats that they confront. We want to be clear that the threats in West Africa, in the Sahel, pose a risk to U.S. service members and, yes, to the United States of America. So, Secretary Austin, can you tell us what our strategy is, what our plan is? In the short term, are we just going to withdraw to protect the littoral states in West Africa? Or in the long term, how much of a gap are we going to have to leave in time and in space to where we're going to start to call the Sahel a caliphate?
Thank you, sir. We know that terrorism thrives in ungoverned spaces. And for that reason, our approach throughout has been to help countries develop a capability to defend their territory, and that will decrease the ability for terrorists to operate in those spaces and export terror. In order to do that, though, we have to have a reliable partner. Now, following the coup in 23,
the coup in Niger.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. We've been encouraging the junta to conduct free and fair elections, like they said they were going to do early on. They've not done that, and have no intent on doing that, as far as we can tell. And so, if we don't have a reliable partner to work with, then it's very difficult for us to do the work that we know it needs to be. We will always lead with our values.
Agree with you. I'm going to be out of time. I just hope that we can continue to talk about a strategy for that area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Recently, we had the Supreme Allied Commander here, and I asked him straight up, can we win in Ukraine? And he said, yes, without hesitation. Now, we have a lot of disagreement inside of our party. Matter of fact, even people sitting next to each other can disagree on how we handle Ukraine. But one thing we'd probably agree is if we promise somebody something, that we should probably get them in a timely manner if we're going to have any chance at all. And one of the things I have a big problem with is we keep on saying we're going to give people stuff, but we slow roll it. The most assured way to extend this war is to make sure that they don't get the weapons in a timely manner, whether it be Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, or what we're doing in Ukraine right now. The only time we ever were able to be effective as the leading world power was surge ops. If we have a country with a $200 billion GDP going against a country with a $2 trillion GDP with a much larger and modern army, we can't expect them to actually hold out or do any good damage unless we supply them the things we promised them. It took us a long time to get them the tanks that we promised, the ammunition we promised, and other things we promised, not to mention Taiwan. They paid for stuff we still haven't given them. And then we had to do another package, but I don't know when that's going to get there. My concern is that we're not delivering the things we promised people in order to be effective in what our strategy is as global leaders. With that said, Secretary Austin, what are we doing to streamline that process to get the deliverables to those people who need it as strategic allies?
Well, certainly we are working hard to ensure that we rapidly deliver security assistance to Ukraine, and I want to thank the Congress for your support of the supplemental. It took us a while to get that across the goal line, but that you can't provide the security assistance without the resources. If you look at Israel, we moved heaven and earth to get capability to Israel.
I want to be very specific because we're time limited. What are we doing specifically to get the weapons to Taiwan and Ukraine that we've been slow rolling so far?
Well, you may have heard me say earlier in terms of the FMS backlog for Taiwan that, early on I set up a Tiger team to look at this and work through these issues, work through the obstacles, and they've been doing that. They've identified some ways to speed some things up, but it's a complex process, and it involves a lot of inputs. Industry is a big player in this, and as much as we may want it, unless industry can produce it in a timely fashion, you can't get it. So, and I know that's all obvious to you, but we will remain focused on this, and it's important to all of us that we get Taiwan what it's asked for and what it's paid for, so that they can defend themselves.
Okay, I've heard you talking about Israel, and I've heard you talk about Taiwan, specifically in Ukraine. You're talking about a country who right now is losing grounds, who's being outshelled 10-1. We've seen this coming. It's not like it's a surprise. Like we haven't been at war now for a couple of years. And what concerns me is we have a combined European and United States GDP of about $47 trillion. We're going against a country that has a GDP of $2 trillion, and yet we're getting outgunned 10-1. I find that extremely alarming to me if we're going to be good stewards of the assets we have, that we cannot deliver what it takes to win a conflict that we say that we're committed to. Whether we agree on that or not, the worst possible scenario is happening right now. 2 years. 2 years, we've seen this coming. We voted unanimously in NATO to support this country. Whether we like it or not, as a divided Congress, we committed to it, we funded it, and yet we don't do our job to deliver quickly. We need to be aggressive. It can't be platitudes where we're reviewing, blah, blah, blah. It's hard. We need feedback on what we can do to radically change this process, to deliver what we need to in order to win this conflict, or else this country will be forever changed and we'll lose a top 5 country in resources who produces 70% of the European grain in a time where we're going to have double the need for food around the world in the next 25 years. And you have the food poor nations of Iran.
It is quite remarkable that a country that has the capability that Ukraine had at the beginning of this fight, facing the most powerful military in Europe, has been able to fight and hold off the Russians for 2 years. The only way that they can do that is with our help and the help of allies and partners.
I hope we can streamline that process, because I'm very worried right now we're losing ground because we haven't done our part. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Chair now recognizes a gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for being here today with our committee. I just have to say, as a footnote to the prior conversation, it's incredible to me that there are concerns being expressed about getting aid to Ukraine quickly enough after 6 months of delay by the Republican Speaker of the House to getting this aid package to the floor so that Congress could vote on it. So I felt like I had to say that before I get into my own questions, just as a way to make sure we remember why there was a significant delay recently. Secretary Austin, I want to thank you and express to you my appreciation for your commitment to eradicating the scourge of sexual harassment and sexual assault in the military, and would very much like to hear from you an update on the standing up of OSTCs across the services, and if you could also share with me any information on the path forward to ensuring that all OSTCs will be prepared to include sexual harassment cases by the January 1st, 2025 start date.
Well, thank you, and let me thank Congress for your support of the significant changes to the UCMJ that we made that I believe will provide better results for the force going forward and our ability to tackle this really important issue. And it's an issue that, as you know, that I took on from the very first day that I came in office. All of the OSTPs are stood up and functioning in the services, and again, there are referrals being made. One case has already gone to trial, and so we don't have a significant amount of data to assess at this point, but we have the framework to be able to assess whether or not we're moving in the right direction or not. Our legal department has really done the right things in outlining that framework, and so I think we'll continue to be in a good place here. But our leaders are invested in this, from secretaries on down to the chiefs of defense, the chief of defense here, the chairman, and also the service chiefs as well. So a lot more work to be done yet, but I think we're off to a good start, and certainly we continue to ask you for the funds to support our efforts, and we do so in this budget, and I want to thank you for what you've done thus far.
Appreciate that so much. I do think at some point soon, at one of our hearings in the future, it would be great to have an update once that data is available, so that we can be able to plan going forward and understand where we have been successful and where maybe we have not been as successful. I want to switch gears a little bit for the latter part of my questioning, and want to focus on what's happening with the Gaza temporary pier, and just share, I think, publicly how proud I am of the United States for everything that we are doing to try to get humanitarian aid to people who are starving in the Gaza Strip. And I absolutely understand why the effort is being stood up in order to use a temporary pier, but I am significantly concerned about the safety and the security of our women and men who are assisting. I am significantly concerned about the aid workers that will be asked to execute the mission, and I am very concerned about the way Israel might engage during that process. And so would like for you to share with us as much as you can about safeguards that are being put in place for our personnel.
This is a thing that the chairman and I engaged General Carrillo on very recently here, and throughout, quite frankly, since the beginning of this. And based upon the measures that he has put in place and what he's laid out, I'm confident that our troops will be able to protect themselves. As you know, we briefed before that the Israelis are also going to provide assistance, providing force protection for our troops in the area, and we'll have assets in the area beyond that.
Gentley's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Austin, I want to first start out by saying I'm relieved to hear that the diagnosis in your health is improved, and we hope that it continues to do the same. So that's really good to hear. As one of my colleagues, Mr. Panetta, had pointed out, the Sahel area has had 8 coups since 2020. Is that correct?
There have been a number there, yes.
Can you tell me who is president since 2020?
I'm sorry?
Who has been president of the United States since 2020?
Of course, President Biden was inaugurated.
And I want to go into Iraq for a moment. The amount of Iranian missiles and rockets that's been fired has been vastly increased between 2021 and 2024. Would you agree? Over 159 plus attacks?
There have been a number of attacks. The vast majority of those attacks have been ineffective.
And can you tell me who was president during this time?
Of course, it was President Biden.
What
I would also tell you
is that in 2019, we were able to put 18 historic peace treaties in place called the Abraham Accords. Do you agree that, given the fact that it wasn't since 1979 for Egypt, 1994 for Jordan to normalize relations with Israel, that this was a very good step towards helping with the stabilization of the Middle East?
I do agree with that.
And can you tell me who put that in place?
It was a previous administration, obviously.
Can you tell me who that was exactly, Mr. Secretary? Didn't think so. And under the attacks that took place on October 7th of 2023 that resulted in over 1,200 innocent men, women, and children being slaughtered, being raped, being taken hostage, etc. Can you tell me who was president at that time?
Of course, it's President Biden.
In 2016 and 2020, we recognized that 12% of global trade goes through the Red Sea. And in an effort to try and ensure the safety and security of trade and commerce, which would allow us to keep our goods down, there was a designation as a terrorist organization of the Houthis. Can you tell me who put that designation in place, sir?
It was the previous administration.
And can you tell me who removed that designation, sir?
Of course, it was removed by this administration.
And can you tell me whether or not, just a simple yes or no, that we've seen an increase in disruption and attacks in the Red Sea under this administration?
We have seen increased violence.
Thank you so much, sir. And can you also tell me who was in office in 2014 when Russians came across in Donetsk and also in Lugansk in Ukraine?
President Obama.
And can you tell me who was the vice president at the time?
President Biden.
And can you tell me then, in the ramp up to the war where things have continued to escalate vastly, and I think that you have been great at continuing to give us the facts on how Russia is advancing, what the major threats are, how Ukraine is being pushed out with necessary funding, as you've pointed out numerous times. Can you tell me at what point you saw the war ramping up from Russia in their attacks?
This is prior to the attack or
No.
Recently?
Can you tell me when you saw the greatest advancement in what year exactly?
6 months ago.
Okay.
You know,
and who was the president at the time?
If we had the ability to
My point in trying to understand this, Mr. Secretary, is that we have pointed out numerous times, as my previous colleague said, that we are not safer now under this administration than we were previously, which is a contrary statement to what you've said, as I've just outlined. And not to mention the fact that your predecessors, let's just say in the Democrat administration, Secretary Robert Gates, he also made a comment that said, I think he has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Can you tell me who he was referencing in that comment?
I believe Secretary Gates was referring
Can you just please tell me who he was referencing?
President Biden.
President Biden.
But
so what we've established here is that we are not safer under
earlier
President Biden than we were under President Trump. What we are establishing is that the Abraham Accords was put in place under President Trump to help, and that the things that are occurring in Ukraine, in the Sahel, in Israel, in Afghanistan with the Bosch withdrawal would not have happened under President Trump.
Gentleman's
It has
time's
all
expired.
happened under
Chair now
President Biden.
recognizes the gentlelady from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our committee hearing, Secretary Austin and General Brown. Secretary Austin, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to my colleagues' comments.
Yeah, just to make the point that you know, the point that I made earlier was that without our leadership, without our engagement, the condition in Europe would be a heck of a lot worse. Putin would own Ukraine, and Europe would be in a much worse place. And of course, what we've done in the Middle East as a result, in the aftermath of this invasion or attack by Hamas, is to work to ensure that Israel has had the means to defend itself. And at the same time, we're doing what's necessary to protect our troops and civilians in the area, and also contain this conflict and prevent it from becoming a regional conflict.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. General Brown, first of all, congratulations on your confirmations. You've been confirmed since the last time you were before us. You know, I'm worried about the growing ties between Russia and North Korea and Iran, and really want to understand what we're doing to strengthen our allies and our partnerships around the world in order to deal with that threat.
Well, as I said earlier, as we look at these particular threats, as the world's got more complex, what I found is that we've been able to engage more and more with our allies and partners. I've been in this job for 7 months. I've engaged about 170 times with my counterparts, as most recent as yesterday. And it's that dialogue of how we work together. I've watched how European nations have not only focused on what's going on in Europe, but they're also focused on the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world. I would say the same thing about the Indo-Pacific nations focused on what's going on in Europe.
What do you see as our biggest threat?
Well, our biggest threat is that we don't lead. I mean, one of the things that U.S. leadership is highly desired. It's watched, and that's the feedback you get when I engage with our counterparts. And so we've got to be able to lead and appreciate what the Congress was able to do with this supplemental. Because once we've done that, in the course of the past week, I've engaged with a number of my counterparts, and they've all appreciated the fact, Ukraine in particular, the fact that U.S. leadership to move forward. So we've got to continue to work together to address all these threats, and that's the way we'll be successful for not only for our national security, but for global security as well.
Well, thank you, sir. You know, I think another way we lead is making sure that our military reflects the beautiful diversity that is America. When aspiring for leadership roles, I think you have to sometimes see it to know that you could be it. And we know that you have to, that as Black soldiers look at the fact that we have both an African-American Secretary of Defense, the first one, and the second chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I think that they envision themselves in those roles, and that's a good thing. Secretary Austin, can you talk about why it's important to create a diverse pipeline when you think about the military and our role globally in the world?
Well, our military, thank you. Our military should reflect our country. We have a diverse country, and our military currently reflects that. It will continue to reflect that. And we want talent from every corner of the country. And as we acquire that talent, we want our troops to know that if they are qualified, if they do the work, they can be successful. There's a path for them to be successful and climb as far as they want to climb, and that's you succeed in the military based on merit. It's been that way in the past. It is that way today. It will be that way in the future. So.
General Brown, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'd also echo what you said. I often say young people only aspire to be what they see. And I just feel, privileged to have this opportunity to sit here as a chairman and sit next to Secretary Austin to be role models, not just for African Americans, but for all. That, we want to provide an opportunity for everyone that joins our military to serve as a DoD civilian to reach their full potential.
Absolutely. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady's chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gooden.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know you've been asked a few times. I just wanted to elaborate on the Gaza Pier construction that's going on. So if we had U.S. service members that were attacked, is there a procedure in place? Do the Israelis respond first, or are we going to defend ourselves first? Has that been discussed that you could share?
Well, it depends on where the attack came from and the nature of the attack. I would continue to highlight that our troops always have the inherent right to protect themselves. And so, as we've stated before, the Israelis are assisting in in providing security near the shore, and so. And I've talked with the Minister of Defense, Israeli Minister of Defense, on this a couple of times, and he assures me that they will do everything possible to protect our troops. But we can protect ourselves. We've also talked with General Carrillo, the combatant commander, and he outlined in detail all of the additional measures he's putting in place to ensure that we protect our troops. And I am comfortable with what he's outlined. And again, you can't. I mean, there are a number of things that can happen, but no matter what happens, I think we'll be in the best position to take care of our troops and defend ourselves. This is really important to me and the chairman. So.
And would you agree then that we're still moving toward that goal that the president stated in the State of the Union, that we would not have boots on the ground there?
We will have no American troops on the ground in Gaza. Right.
Thank you. Continuing with that region and Gaza, et cetera. Would you have any comment on the role that the Qataris have played? It's my view that they've been pretty helpful through this process, and our air base there in Qatar is essential to our operations in the Middle East.
The Qataris have been very helpful, and they are, to this day as we speak, they are instrumental in trying to negotiate an agreement that calls for a ceasefire, return of hostages, and so they've been enormously helpful there. And you're right, we have a significant capability there in Qatar in terms of the air base that we have there, and they've been really generous in providing access to us and resources for us. And General Brown and I have both served there in formal lives, and again. They've been great partners, and I think they'll continue to be going forward.
Thank you. That was my impression. I was happy to hear you reiterate it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And with that, I believe all the members have been accommodated, and I appreciate your patience and presence. And Undersecretary McCord, you had a good day. I appreciate you very much. Does the ranking member have any closing statements? If not, apparently not. We are adjourned.